Tom Hanks has played so many different roles based on real people, it's almost like he may have an identity crisis by now.
I think the best thing we can do is to let people know that each one of them is precious.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a movie that I've been looking forward to for quite some time, and I kind of think about it as a companion piece to the documentary about Mr. Rogers that came out last year, Won't You Be My Neighbor, which I really loved. This is a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Tell me in the comments, guys, what did you think about this movie? And most importantly, I want to know, how did it make you feel watching this film? And don't forget, guys, consider clicking on the subscribe button. I do movies, I talk about TV shows, and more. But in the meantime, let's talk A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Based on the true story of a real-life friendship between Fred Rogers and journalist Tom Janoid, after a jaded magazine writer is assigned a profile of Fred Rogers, he overcomes skepticism, learning about empathy, kindness, and decency from America's most beloved neighbor. Let me just start off by telling you how I feel about Mr. Rogers. I grew up watching him on TV, and I learned a lot from him. He was a big part of my childhood, and even growing up, there's still things that I've learned from his advice by watching his program, and that's the whole point of this movie. But other than that, he was a role model for me. In life and in arts and entertainment, there are three figures that I looked up to. That's Walt Disney, Stan Lee, and Fred Rogers. Now, the first two, Stan Lee and Walt Disney, they had big empires, big companies, and they had theme parks, comic books turned into movies, all this stuff. Mr. Rogers, he just had a simple kids program that was just aimed towards children. And to some people that may not be a big deal, the fact that all he had was a TV show aimed towards kids, but what he did was such an influence on the entire world, showing what sympathy, acceptance, and forgiveness is all about, and that's exactly what this movie does. What makes this movie interesting is that it's not really focused on Mr. Rogers, but it's focused on a journalist named Lloyd Vogel, played by Matthew Rhys, and that's inspired by the journalist Tom Janoid. And I kind of compare this movie to Saving Mr. Banks, whereas Tom Hanks was in that film as well. He's playing Walt Disney. Now, he's not the center character of the film, but he plays a big role. P.L. Travers is actually the center role of that storyline. Here, it's the same exact thing, where Mr. Rogers, he plays a very powerful role in this film. He's kind of like the mentor to the central character. And this character, Lloyd, he symbolizes what I think all of us, the individual. He's a broken man. He's had not so good relationship with his father, with his family. He doesn't know how to deal with his emotions, and he ends up getting the job of profiling Mr. Rogers, and he's really hesitant to interview him because he thinks it's a kind of a dead-end job of interviewing a man who just talks to children and plays with puppets, and that's how he puts it. But he ends up learning a lot about him. It's a journey for him in this film, and it's almost like Mr. Rogers not only talking to Lloyd, but he's talking to all of us as well, and that's the magic I felt in this movie. It felt like Mr. Rogers was still alive, talking to us. It's like a continuation of his TV series into this film. This film just feels very immersed with how Tom Hanks plays the role of Mr. Rogers and how interactive it feels, because it begins with him on his show singing his song, and he starts telling us a story, and it's actually the introduction to the film. So he's kind of playing not only Mr. Rogers, but he's playing the narrator of this film. And here he's telling the story of Lloyd and what he's gone through, and throughout the film we see him interact with Lloyd, whether it be in dreams or in interviews. It's crazy things that I didn't expect to be in this movie, but it just somehow made sense. It fit with this type of film. It didn't feel like the typical biographical movie, and there are scenes that just really feel like you're involved, like the audience is involved. One in particular that I have to mention, and it was so awe-inspiring to be a part of this in the theater, and I think everyone will feel this when they watch this scene. It's a moment when Mr. Rogers and Lloyd are in a restaurant, they're eating, and Mr. Rogers tells him, I want you to just take a minute in silence and just remember the people that you're thankful for. He says something like that, thankful for people that have come in your life, and there's no talking at all, no dialogue, everything's silent. And Tom Hanks, it's Mr. Rogers here, he looks at us, he looks at the camera, and it's almost like he's telling us he wants us to do that too. And literally, there's no talking at all for that 1 minute. And I think that's what was done on purpose, for us to actually take that 1 minute to actually be thankful for certain people in our lives. But that scene is just one example of many moments in this film where you're going to feel so many emotions. I mean, I feel inspired, I felt happy, I felt sad, I felt like I want to be like Mr. Rogers walking out of this film. It gives you that great feeling that there's a possibility of goodness in the world, of kindness, forgiveness, acceptance. And even though this man had passed away years ago, I feel this is a movie that's going to make his legacy live on. This movie and the documentary as well. It's just something that we need in this world. We need more people like Mr. Rogers. Let's face it, he may have just aimed towards children in his programs, but there's a reason why he aims for children, because you can grow up and use what he taught you as a child into your adulthood. This film was also very authentic visually. Watching the movie, it feels like you're part of his show. As I said before, the movie begins with him introducing himself. He's on the show the same way that it was filmed, and he takes us into the story of the film. And also there's transition periods between scenes. If you have characters that happen to be traveling by plane or driving a car, he had a miniature set in the beginning of his shows, and they recreate these little transition periods in the movie where they're traveling in whatever vehicle they're in, but it's all by a miniature set. And I just thought that was ingenious to incorporate the show but still have it be this biographical story. Lastly, there's two individuals I want to mention. First, the director, Marielle Heller. Now, I never heard of her, but she directed Can You Forgive Me, which had Melissa McCartney in it, and I haven't had a chance to check that one out yet, but she did such a great job with this film. And sometimes to have an unknown director can be a good thing, because look at the type of stuff you can create. So I look forward to what she has planned for the future. The other person, some people probably only know who I'm going to mention, Tom Hanks. I said at the beginning that this man is going to have an identity crisis with all the roles that he plays. He's played real people, fictional people, and it's incredible the amount of talent that this man has. And as I said before, he played Walt Disney, and Walt Disney's one of my idols, and I loved how he portrayed him in that movie. And I saw the picture of him as Mr. Rogers when this film was in production, and it looked uncanny. He looked just like the man. I just cannot believe all these real people that he's played had such a close resemblance to recreating these people for this actor for all these roles. And he was great. I mean, now he didn't sound exactly like Mr. Rogers, but I mean, that's kind of unattainable to do. You may not be able to do that, but the way his mannerisms were, the way he talked, maybe not his tone, the things he said, and just, you didn't see Tom Hanks. You saw Mr. Rogers. But those are my thoughts talking about A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Thank you guys so much for listening in and my thoughts. Don't forget to comment below. Tell me what you thought about this movie and how did it make you feel. And don't forget, consider subscribing so we can talk movies, TV shows, and more. Have a beautiful day.